My name is Ray Dorsey, and I drove 22 years before I ever told anybody about the man in the orange vest, mostly because the first two people I told gave me that careful look you give a guy who might be about to lose his medical card. I ran Nevada in the late 90s, US 95 between Fallon and Tonopah, which is not a road so much as a rumor of a road, a couple 100 miles of two-lane blacktop with a painted line down the middle, and nothing on either side but sagebrush, dry lake beds, and the kind of darkness that makes your headlights feel like a flashlight with a dying battery. People who have never driven it think the desert at night is peaceful, and it is, right up until you realize that you have not seen another set of headlights in 50 minutes, and that if something happened to you out there, the next person along would probably find your truck around sunrise, and that is if they were paying attention. I was hauling dry van, general freight, mostly mining supplies and grocery loads for the little towns out that way, and I ran it so often that I knew the road by feel, the way you know the stairs in your own house, which is exactly the kind of confidence that sets a man up. It was a Tuesday in October, somewhere around 1 in the morning, and I was southbound out of Fallon with an empty stomach and a full tank, listening to a Reno AM station that faded in and out like somebody was breathing on it. The moon was maybe a quarter full, enough to put a gray shine on the flats, and I remember thinking that the desert looked like the bottom of an ocean that had gotten up and left. About 20 minutes past the Coaldale Junction, right where the road starts to bend and drop toward a wash, my lights picked up a man standing on the shoulder. And I want to be clear about this part, because this is the part people always want to argue with me about. He was not a shape. He was not a shadow. He was a man in his 50s or 60s, gray in the stubble, wearing a highway department vest with the orange body and the silver reflective striping across the chest, and the striping lit up in my headlights the way that material does, that hot white flare that hurts your eyes a little. Now, I have picked up maybe 4 people in my whole career, and every one of them was in daylight and in obvious trouble, because a guy alone in a truck at night learns real quick that the world is full of situations you cannot unenter. But a highway worker is different. A highway worker means there is a crew somewhere, or a breakdown, or a problem I need to know about. So I came off the throttle and started slowing, and as I got closer, he did the thing that made my stomach go cold before I even understood why. He did not wave. He did not put his thumb out. He held up one flat hand, palm toward me, the way a flagger does when he wants you to stop, and with his other hand he pointed down the road, past the bend, into the dark, and he was shaking his head slowly, side to side, like a man telling you no in a language he does not expect you to speak. I got that truck down to maybe 15 miles an hour by the time I came even with him, and I cracked my window, and I said something brilliant like, "Hey, you all right? You need a ride, and here is where it stops being a normal night." He was gone, not walked off, not stepped back into the brush, because I was looking straight at him, and my window was down, and I would have heard boots on gravel. There was a fence post about where he had been standing, and there was nothing else, just my own mirror light sliding across bare dirt, and I sat there with my foot on the brake, and my heart going like a bird in a box, telling myself I had fallen asleep with my eyes open, which is a thing that happens, and which I had done exactly once before in my life and hated. So I did what any sane man does. I told myself I was tired, I put it back in gear, and I rolled forward at about 20 miles an hour instead of the 65 I had been doing, because whether or not there had been a man, my hands did not want to go fast anymore. I came around that bend at 20, and my light swung across the road, and there was a horse standing in my lane. A big paint horse, brown and white, dead still, head turned toward me, with a broken lead rope hanging off its halter, and behind it in the ditch was a stock trailer laid over on its side, with its wheels still slowly turning. If I had come around that curve at 65, and I had come around it at 65 100 times before, that horse would have gone through my windshield, and I would have gone into the wash, and this would be a story somebody else told about me. I got stopped, put my flashers on, got my triangles out, and it turned out the fellow who had rolled the trailer had already climbed out and walked up the far side looking for cell signal that did not exist yet in that part of the world, and he came running back when he saw my lights. Nice guy, rancher out of Silver Peak. His truck had blown a steer tire, and the trailer had gotten away from him. We sat on the shoulder for 2 hours, waiting for the highway patrol, and when the trooper finally came, and after all the paperwork was done, and the horse was walked into the trooper's line of sight, so nobody could say I hit anything, I asked him, as casually as I could manage, whether NDOT had a night crew working that stretch. He said no. Not that night, not that month, nothing scheduled south of Fallon until spring. And I said, well, there was a guy in a vest a half-mile back, and the trooper stopped writing and looked at me for a second longer than he needed to. And then he said, in a flat voice like a man reading a grocery list, that a state maintenance worker had been killed on that curve in 1991 by a driver who came around it too fast, and that he was the second one to go down on that same bend, and that if I did not mind, he would rather not talk about it standing out here at 3 a.m. He signed my card, and he left. I have never seen a lawman get in a car that quick. Here is the part I sat on for years, and this is why I am telling it now. About 4 months later, I was fueling in Tonopah, and I went into the little cafe attached to the station, the kind with the register up front, and the wall by the coffee machine covered in photographs going back decades, softball teams and hunting trips, and the volunteer fire department. And there on that wall was a photo of a highway crew standing around a plow truck in the snow, 6 men squinting into the sun, and one of them was my man. Grey stubble, heavy in the shoulders, the same slightly turned down mouth. Somebody had written the names underneath in ballpoint, and the third one from the left, the one I was staring at, said Mercer. I did not ask the waitress about it, because at that point in my life I had learned that some questions are just an invitation for the world to answer you, and I did not want an answer. I paid for my eggs, and I went back out to the truck, and I have taken that curve at 40 miles an hour every single time since, and I have never once minded the lost 4 minutes. I go by Vern Kowalski, and I pulled reefer for 11 years out of Salt Lake, which means I know I-70 across Utah better than I know most of my relatives. Now, for anybody who has not run it, there is a stretch out there between Salina and Green River that is 110 miles, with absolutely nothing on it. No fuel, no food, no towns, no exits worth the name, and the state actually posts a sign at both ends telling you so, because it is the longest run without services on the entire interstate system, and they got tired of pulling stranded families off the shoulder. It is beautiful country in the daylight, all those cliffs and folded rock, and the San Rafael swell, looking like somebody took a bedsheet and shook it, and then it froze that way. At night, it is a hallway. That is the only way I know how to describe it. It is a hallway with the lights off, and you are walking down it, hoping the door at the far end is still where you left it. There is a rest area out in the middle of it, called Ghost Rock, which is a real name on a real green sign, and not something I am adding for flavor, and it is just a pull-off, with restrooms, and parking, and a view area, and it is where every driver on that road ends up at some point when the clock runs out on them. I pulled in there on a night in February, with about 40 minutes left on my 14, and a load of frozen product that did not care what time I got there. There were 2 other trucks parked, both of them dark, and I did my walk around, checked my reefer, and climbed in the bunk with the engine idling for heat. And I want you to hold on to that detail, because a truck idling is a loud thing, and a man in a sleeper with a diesel running does not hear much of anything from outside. I woke up around 2:40 because my CB was talking. I keep it on low when I sleep, always have. It is a habit from when I ran team, and it just never left me. And there was a woman's voice on Channel 19, calm as anything, no crying, no panic, and she was counting. She said, 122, and then a pause, long one, maybe a minute, and then she said, 121. And I lay there in the dark with my hands behind my head thinking, all right, somebody is walking the shoulder and calling out mileposts, which is actually a smart thing to do if you are broken down and trying to tell somebody where you are, except that a person walking does not cover a mile in 1 minute. And also, and this took me another minute to catch, the numbers were going the wrong way. Westbound mileposts on that road go down as you head towards Salina, and Ghost Rock sits right around 120, and she was counting down toward me. So I keyed up. I said, break 19, that a driver walking out there, you got a truck down. Nothing. I said it again, gave her my location, told her I had water and a phone that might catch a bar if she got to me. And she said, 120, right on top of me. And then the counting stopped. I sat up. I did not turn on my light, because there is a thing that happens in your head at that hour where you do not want to be the lit window. And I looked out through the little gap in my curtain at a parking lot with 2 dark trucks and a bathroom building with 1 sodium lamp buzzing over the door, and there was nobody out there. No headlights on the interstate in either direction. And then somebody knocked on my trailer. Now, drivers get tapped on all the time. It is usually a lot lizard, or a guy who needs a jump, or somebody letting you know your marker light is out, and the normal response is to be annoyed. This was not a knock on the cab where a person knocks. It was 3 taps, spaced out, way back along the box, and then about 10 seconds later, it was 3 taps further forward, and then closer, coming up the length of my trailer toward the cab, like somebody was walking their knuckles along the side of it. 53 feet, and I counted it the whole way. I have never been so aware of the exact dimensions of my own equipment. And when it got to the front, to the gap right behind my sleeper, it stopped, and I sat there in the dark, holding a tire thumper like an idiot, waiting for the driver's door. Nothing came. I waited an hour. I did not sleep again. When the sky finally went grey, I got out with the sun coming up, and I walked the whole rig, and my trailer was filthy the way a February trailer in Utah is filthy, road salt and grime 1/8 of an inch thick, and there were handprints in it, not smears, handprints, flat, palm and fingers, one after another, all the way down the side, at about the height of a person standing on the ground with their arm out, and they stopped at the front, and there was nothing in the dirt underneath, which meant nothing, because it was gravel and pavement, and gravel does not hold a footprint. I stood there in that beautiful red canyon country, with the sun coming over the rock, and I felt about as far from beautiful as I have ever felt. Here is my hook, and this is the part I chew on. The eastbound driver I talked to at the Green River Chevron that morning, a big old boy in a Peterbilt hauling pipe, listened to me tell it while he pumped his fuel, and he did not laugh. He said his ex-wife's cousin worked dispatch for a Utah outfit, and that back in the 90s a woman broke down in that 110-mile stretch in the summer with a kid in the car, and she left the kid with the vehicle, which is the right call, and she started walking for help, and she was found by a road crew a long way from where the car was, and that she had gone the wrong direction, away from the nearest town, in the dark. He said she had counted mileposts out loud in her car's CB before the battery went, and that a driver had heard her and could not find her. I have never verified that. I have looked on and off for 20 years, and I have never found the newspaper story, and honestly, I am not sure I would like it if I did. But every time I run that stretch, and I still do, I key up around milepost 120, and I say, out loud, "On 19, ma'am, you are going the wrong way. Town is behind you. It costs me nothing. And if I am crazy, I am crazy in a way that does not hurt anybody." Folks call me Dale, and I ran doubles for a line haul outfit in Pennsylvania for most of my working life, which means I spent about 9,000 nights of it on the turnpike between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh. If you have driven that road, you know it is old. It was the first one of its kind in the country, and it was built partly on a railroad grade that a bunch of 19th century men blasted through mountains and then ran out of money on, which is why it has those tunnels. What most people do not know is that there is a piece of the original road, 13 miles of it, out east of Breezewood, that got bypassed back in 1968 because the 2-lane tunnels were causing traffic jams a mile long, and instead of tearing it up, they just closed the gates and walked away. 3 tunnels, a travel plaza, all 4 lanes of concrete, still sitting there with weeds coming up through the joints. They call it the abandoned turnpike, and hikers and bicycle people go out there now, and there are signs and a parking lot, and everything is very official and daytime and pleasant. In 2004, when this happened to me, it was none of those things. It was a hole in the world with a chain across it. I had a GPS unit that year, one of the early truck ones, a big plastic brick suction cup to my windshield that my wife bought me for Christmas and that I did not entirely trust, mostly because it kept trying to send me down residential streets in Camp Hill. I was eastbound, running empty, about 2 in the morning in a heavy fog, the kind that sits in those valleys and turns your low beams into a wall of white, so you go to the fogs and you slow down and you drive by the fog line like a man reading Braille. And somewhere east of the Breezewood interchange, my unit chirped and rerouted me. It said, in that flat woman's voice they had, "Exit right in 1/2 mile." And I said out loud, to a piece of plastic, "There is no exit here," because I knew that road, and there is not. But there was. There was a break in the guardrail, and a service ramp, and a pair of reflective markers, and I was going 40 in fog, and the ramp came up on me, and I want to tell you I made a decision. But the honest version is that my hands took it, the way your hands take an exit when you are tired, and the machine tells you to, and the whole day has been about doing what you are told. I came off onto pavement that was rougher than the turnpike had any business being, and about a 1/4 mile in, my headlights found a sign. It was green, and the paint was chalked out, and it said Cove Valley Travel Plaza, 1 mile. Now I have to explain why that stopped my heart. Cove Valley was real. Cove Valley was a service plaza on the old alignment, with a restaurant and pumps, and it closed the same day the road closed, in 1968, and by 2004 the buildings were long gone, and there was nothing there but a big empty slab of concrete in the trees. I had never been there in my life, but I knew the name the way you know the names of towns that drowned when they built a dam, because old drivers talk, and the old drivers I ran with had all eaten in that place when they were young men, and they talked about the pie. I stopped. I sat there with the fog rolling through my high beams, and I got the atlas out, the paper one, because I trusted paper, and I found the spot, and there was no road there. And I looked at my GPS, and the little truck icon was moving, sitting still with the parking brake set, and that icon was gliding along a grey line on the screen at what it said was 58 miles an hour, and the line it was following was labelled Pennsylvania Turnpike, and it was headed east into a piece of the map that on my paper atlas was just green. And then, out ahead of me in the fog, somebody flashed their lights. 2 flashes, then 2 more. And I have to tell you that in my business, that means something specific. That means you are clear to come over. That is a driver being polite to another driver. And it is such a familiar thing that for about 3 seconds I felt relieved, and I actually lifted my hand off the wheel to flash back. And then the shape of it settled in my head, that the light was coming from low down and far away, and it was not moving, and that the reason the fog was glowing in that particular squared-off way was that the light was inside something. It was inside the mouth of a tunnel. That would have been Rays Hill, and Rays Hill has not had a working light bulb in it since Lyndon Johnson was president. I backed that set of doubles down a 1/4 mile of abandoned highway, in the fog, in the dark, at idle, with my window down and my head out, and I have done a lot of hard driving in my life, and that is the one I am proudest of. And I got back on the live road, and I drove to the yard doing 55 with both hands, and I did not turn the radio on. The hook. 2 weeks later, I took that GPS to a guy in Chambersburg who fixed electronics and did some mapping work on the side, and I told him the road had put me somewhere that does not exist, and I expected him to laugh. He did not. He pulled the map file, and he showed me on his computer that the base data those consumer units used came out of old Federal Survey files, and that the old files still had the original 1940 alignment in them, all 13 miles, tunnels and all, because nobody ever went in and deleted it. It was in there. It had always been in there, sitting under the new road like a floor under a floor, and every once in a while, when the unit lost enough satellites in the fog and in those valleys, it would guess, and it would guess wrong, and it would send you down a road that had been dead for 36 years. He thought that was a fun little bit of trivia. He was very pleased with himself. And I said, sure, that explains the exit, and it explains the sign, and it might even explain the pavement. Then I asked him what part of the file explained somebody flashing their high beams at me out of a tunnel that has not had power since 1968, and he stopped smiling, and he charged me nothing for his time, and I went home. They call me Marcus, and for about 6 years I ran a small operation out of Gallup, New Mexico, mostly hotshot and flatbed work, hauling equipment up into the Four Corners for the drilling and the utilities. The road I lived on was US 491, which runs north out of Gallup through Shiprock and on into Colorado. And if that number does not ring a bell, it is because until 2003, that highway was called US 666. 3 states got tired of people stealing the signs and of the reputation, and they petitioned to have it renumbered, and it went through, and now it is 491 on every map. But I will tell you that not one single driver I ever met in that part of the country called it anything but the old number, and a lot of them made a joke of it, and about half of those jokes had a little something underneath. I want to say something before I tell this, because it matters. That road runs through Navajo land for a long way, and the people who live there have their own understanding of what is out there, and it is not mine, and I am not going to stand here and put words in anybody's mouth or turn somebody's grandmother's teaching into a campfire story. What I will tell you is what an older gentleman said to me in the parking lot of a trading post near Newcomb, after I had been running that road for maybe 8 months and had started asking dumb questions the way outsiders do. He said, "You will see things out here at night, He said, "When you do, do not stop. Do not go back and look, and do not tell it like it is funny." That is the whole of the advice I got, and it is better advice than most of what I have paid for. I did not follow it. Once. It was a Sunday, late April, and I was southbound coming back empty from a job somewhere north of Sheep Springs, and it was full dark and clear with more stars than a man from Ohio has any right to be looking at. That country up there is wide open, and you can see a pickup's headlights coming for 10 minutes before it gets to you, and you can see a porch light for 20. And off to the east, maybe half a mile off the road, there was a house. It was a plain little farmhouse with a pitched roof and a wooden porch, and there was a yellow light burning over the porch, and 2 windows lit warm inside, and there was a stand of cottonwoods behind it, which out there means water, which means somebody built there on purpose a long time ago. And standing at the edge of the porch light, out at the end of the drive, there was a woman in a long skirt, with a shawl or a blanket around her shoulders, and she was waving, both arms, over her head, the way you wave when you want to be seen, not the way you wave to say hello. Out there, that is not a ghost story. That is an emergency. There is no cell service on big pieces of that road even now, and in the 2000s there was nothing at all, and if a person is waving both arms at the road at 10 at night, it means somebody is hurt, or somebody is having a baby, or somebody's truck will not start, and the propane ran out. So I slowed, and I looked for the drive, and I could see the drive, packed dirt, cattle guard, the works, and I was doing maybe 20, and looking right at that porch when the light went out. Not turned off. There is a difference, and anybody who has watched a bulb die knows it. Turned off is instant. This went out the way a fire goes out when you put a lid on it, and it took the 2 windows with it, and it took the woman, and it took, and this is the part that made me sick, the shape of the house, because a house at night against stars still has a shape, a black rectangle with a roof line, and there was no rectangle. There was a hill with some trees on it and a lot of stars. I stopped. That was my mistake, and I own it. I sat on the shoulder with my flashes going, and I told myself very reasonably that I had seen a ranch house, and that the family had gone to bed, and that the angle had changed, and I actually got out of the truck. I stood there on the gravel in the cold with the door open and the dome light on, and I looked out across that half-mile of dark, and there was no house, and no drive, and no cattle guard. And I want to be honest about what happened next, because people expect a monster, and there was no monster. What happened next was that I got the strongest feeling I have ever had in my life, a physical feeling, in my chest and in the backs of my legs, that I was being looked at very carefully from somewhere close, and that whatever was doing the looking was deciding something. And I got in the truck, and I drove. The hook is this. 3 weeks later, I was at that same trading post buying a coffee, and I was looking at the wall the way you do, at the flyers, and the lost dog notices, and the framed old photographs they had up, and there was a picture of a house. Plain little farmhouse, pitched roof, wooden porch, cottonwoods behind it, and a woman standing on the step with her arms down and a blanket around her shoulders. It was a black and white photo, and it was old, and it was labelled in pencil with a family name and a date in the 50s. I asked the fellow at the register, as normal as I could, whether that place was still standing. He said no. He said it burned, a long time back, before he was born, and that the family moved into Shiprock after. And then he asked me why I wanted to know, and I remembered what the old man told me in the parking lot. And I said, no reason, I just like old houses. And I paid for my coffee, and I never mentioned it out there again, and I am only mentioning it now because I have not driven that road in 11 years, and I do not intend to. My name is Carla Boone, and I have been driving since I was 24, which is longer than some of you have been alive. And yes, I have heard every joke there is about women drivers, and most of them were told to me by men who could not back into a dock at the Walmart in Loveland. I run flatbed. I am based out of North Platte, and the road I want to tell you about is I-80 in Wyoming, between Rawlins and Laramie, over Elk Mountain and Arlington, and down past the snow fences. If you have never crossed there in winter, you need to understand that this is not ordinary bad weather. That stretch is one of the meanest wind corridors in North America, and the state has built miles and miles of wooden snow fence along the north side of the road just to keep the drifts from crossing, and they close that interstate all the time. They close it to light and high-profile vehicles first, and then to everybody. And there is a fine if you go around the gates, because they have gotten tired of pulling people out. Every driver who runs it has a story about the wind. Mine is not about the wind. It was the second week of January, and I had come out of Rawlins with a load of steel and a forecast that said the front would not arrive until noon, and the front, being from Wyoming, did not care what the forecast said. By Arlington, the ground blizzard had come up off the flats, and my world was about 40 feet long. Ground blizzard is its own animal, because the sky can be perfectly clear over your head, and you still cannot see the hood of your own truck, and your headlights just paint the snow going sideways and give you nothing back. I had my 4-ways on, and I was doing between 15 and 20, and I could not see the fog line, could not see the rumble strip, could not see anything but white going right to left in front of me, like static on an old television. And I could not stop, because if you stop on the travel lane in that, the next set of headlights that comes along is going to be inside your trailer before the driver ever knows you are there. So you crawl, and you pray, and you look for the little reflective delineators on the shoulder, and when you cannot see those either, you start doing arithmetic about your own life. The CB had been dead quiet for 20 minutes, which by itself tells you how bad it was, because normally in weather, that channel is a bar fight. And then a man came on, and he had that slow, dry, unbothered voice that older drivers out west have, and he said, "Driver with the steel, you still with me?" I keyed up, and I said, "I am here, I cannot see a thing." And he said, "I know it, I am right in front of you. Come up a little, and you will see me. Stay off the brake, and follow me down. We are going to walk it into Laramie." And I came up maybe 50 feet, and there they were, 2 taillights, dim and red, right in the middle of the white. Just 2, no marker lights that I could make out, no reflective tape flashing back at me, but 2 red lights are 2 red lights when you are blind, and I locked onto them like they were the last thing in the world, and they were. He talked me the whole way. He told me when the road bent, and it bent. He told me there was a hill coming, and to let it roll rather than push, and there was. Somewhere near the top of the grade, he said, "Easy now. There is a car in the ditch on your right. Do not look at it. People steer where they look." And I did not look. He said his handle was cottonwood, and that he had run this road for 30 years, and that I was doing fine. And I have never in my life been so grateful to a stranger, and I told him so, and he laughed and said his wife would be shocked to hear it. We came down out of it about 4 miles west of Laramie, the way that road does, where the wind drops, and suddenly you can see again, and it is like coming up out of water. And the taillights were gone, not turned off at an exit, because there was no exit, and I was doing 35, and there was nothing ahead of me but empty, clean, wet pavement with a little bit of ground drift crawling across it. And here is the thing that I have not been able to put down in 14 years. That pavement was wet and clear because the plow had been through, but between me and Laramie there were no tire tracks in the slush except mine. Behind me, one set. Ahead of me, nothing. I got into the truck stop in Laramie, and I sat in the lot and shook for about 10 minutes. And then I went in and got coffee, and I asked the girl at the register whether the road was open, because I wanted to know what I had just done. She said the interstate had been closed at Rawlins since about an hour before I left, closed to all traffic, gates down, and that they had opened it just for a few minutes to flush out what was already inside. I had come out of the fuel island at Rawlins before the gate came down, and I was, as far as anybody at that counter knew, one of maybe 3 trucks that got through the whole afternoon. I asked about the handle. That is the part I could not leave alone. I sat in that truck stop, and I asked every driver who came through the door for 2 hours whether they knew a cottonwood who ran Elk Mountain, and most of them said no, and one old boy hauling cattle went very quiet, and then said that he had known a driver by that handle out of Rock Springs, and that the man had died in a pileup on that same grade in the 90s, one of the big ones, the kind where 20-some vehicles go into each other in the white, and they close the road for a day and a half. He said the man had been on the radio calling out the road to people behind him right up until he was not. I do not know what to do with that. I am not a religious woman particularly, and I am not asking anybody to believe me. What I will tell you is that I have run that stretch 100 times since, and every time the weather gets ugly out there, I get on 19, and I start calling the road for whoever is behind me, the bends, the hills, the cars in the ditch, and I keep talking until I am down the other side, and I have never once had anybody answer me who was not exactly who they said they were. But I keep doing it. Somebody did it for me. My name is Eddie Salas. I am 58 years old. I pull dry van in the southeast, and I am the last one you are going to hear from tonight. And I am going to warn you up front that my story does not have a monster in it either. Mine has a kid in it, and it is not a scary kid, and that is somehow worse. And I have thought about whether to tell it at all, because it feels like it belongs to somebody. And I have decided that the way I tell it is the way you keep it from belonging to nobody. I run I-59 a lot, up through Mississippi and Alabama toward Chattanooga, and about a decade ago there was a rest area on that road, one of the old ones, brick building, picnic shelters with the pointed roofs, big pecan trees, the kind of place they built in the 70s, when the government still thought a highway ought to have something pleasant on it. The state was in the middle of shutting a bunch of those down for budget reasons, and this one was half closed, meaning the bathrooms were locked and the lights on the building were off, but the lot was still open and drivers still used it, and if you got there before 10 at night, you could get a spot. I pulled in around 11:30 on a Sunday in the fall, with about 6 trucks already parked, and one of them running a generator, and I ate a sandwich and read for a while, and I fell asleep with my window cracked, because it was one of those October nights in Alabama, where the air finally goes soft, and you want to hear the crickets. And I woke up at, and I know the time because I looked, 3:14 in the morning, and the crickets had stopped. All of them. If you have ever spent a night in the woods in the South, you know that is not a small thing. That is a silence you can feel on your skin. And I lay there and listened to my own truck ticking as it cooled, and I thought, all right, something walked through. And then a little voice, right outside my door, about waist height, said, "Is this the blue car?" I want to describe the voice properly. It was a child, maybe 6 or 7, and it was not sad, and it was not spooky, and it was not doing the thing they do in movies, where they say it's slow. It was a normal kid's voice, a little tired, a little impatient, the way a kid sounds at the end of a long trip when they have asked the same question 4 times already. "Is this the blue car?" I said, without thinking. "Honey, no, this is a truck." Which is the single stupidest sentence I have ever spoken, and I have said a lot of things to a lot of dispatchers. And the voice said, "Okay." And that was all. And then the crickets came back on, all at once, like somebody had flipped a switch, and I sat straight up in my bunk with my heart going, and I hit my light, and I got out of that truck faster than a man my age has any business moving, and there was nobody there. Empty lot, 6 trucks, all dark, 1 generator humming, dew on my steps. No footprints in the dew, and there was plenty of dew, and I know that because mine were the only ones on that pavement when the sun came up, and I went out and I looked for a long time. I could not let it go. I am not a curious man by nature. I have made a whole career out of minding my own business, but that one got into me and stayed. And the next trip through, in the daylight, I parked and I walked the property, and out past the picnic shelters where the mowed grass gives up and the pines start. There is a guardrail on the curve of the entrance ramp, and tied to that guardrail was a ribbon, faded almost white, weather-rotted, but tied in a bow, and somebody had put a little plastic sunflower in the knot, and the whole thing had been there long enough that the pine straw had built up around it. I asked at the welcome center down the road, and the lady there, who was about 70 and had worked for the state her whole life, knew exactly what I was asking about before I finished asking it. She said there had been a wreck at that entrance ramp a long time ago, a family coming off the interstate late at night, and that a car had been hit from behind and pushed off, and that not everybody in it walked away. She said people still tied ribbons on that rail. She did not tell me names, and I did not ask for them, and when she saw my face, she said, in the kindest voice, "Honey, a lot of drivers come in here and ask me about that rest area, and you are not the first one this year. They closed that rest area for good about 2 years after, fenced it, put the barrels across the entrance, and I have driven past it 100 times since, and watched the grass come up through the parking lot, and the pecan trees drop on the picnic shelters, with nobody to sweep them off. And every time I go by, and I mean every single time, I say the same thing out loud in my cab, which is nobody, it is not the blue car, but somebody is looking for you, and you keep waiting right there. I do not know if that helps anybody. I do not know if it is real, and I have made my peace with not knowing, because out here you spend your whole life alone in a box with your own thoughts, and the road talks to you, whether you asked it to or not. All I know is what I have learned in 30-some years of running nights, which is that the highway is a place where an enormous number of people have had the worst moment of their entire lives, one after another, at 70 miles an hour, in the dark, alone, and then everybody else just keeps driving over that spot forever. Something has to be left. Maybe it is only left in us. Maybe when you are tired enough and the road is empty enough, your mind reaches out and finds the shape of somebody who was here before you and fills it in, and that is all it is. And that is a perfectly good explanation, and I would not fight anybody who preferred it. But I will tell you what every one of us out here does anyway, and you can go ask any driver who has run more than 10 years and watch his face when you do. We slow down at that one curve. We key up and say something to the empty channel. We tie the ribbon back on when the wind takes it down. And when a voice comes out of the dark at 3 in the morning and asks you something, you answer it politely, and you answer it like a person, because whatever it is a long way from home, and so are you.